"Daddy, can we take the giant woman home?" "Single human's daughter," said to him. Ashton held Flora's hand as the auction house air settled thick with the smell of cold metal and fear. "Daddy, can we take the giant woman home?" Flora pointed a small, trembling finger at the massive show glass dominating the center of the hall. Inside, Aayla sat with her head bowed, representing 20 feet of sun-kissed skin and profound sorrow. The aliens around them laughed, their chitinous carapaces clicking as they viewed her as a mere curiosity or a beast of burden. Ashton saw a goddess trapped in a cage, her proportions magnificent, and her spirit visibly bruised. Her eyes, the color of a dying star, suddenly lifted and met his through the thick transparency of the glass. "She is not a pet, Flora," Ashton said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He felt a pull in his chest, a human resonance that shouldn't exist between species so vastly different in scale. The auctioneer, a spindly creature named Zalbar, stepped forward onto the raised dais. "The Titaness is for sale to the highest bidder," Zalbar croaked, gesturing toward the woman. Ashton's grip on his credit chip tightened until his knuckles turned white. He looked at Aayla, noticing how her tattered dress clung to curves that could crush a man. He felt a surge of protective heat, a desire to be the one she leaned upon. He stepped toward the glass, ignoring the murmurs of the smaller Xenos. Aayla pressed a palm against the barrier, her hand larger than his entire torso. "I will have her," Ashton said, loud enough for the entire room to fall into an uneasy silence. The transaction clicked green on the terminal. The glass began to lower. She stood over him, a mountain of soft flesh and staggering power that eclipsed the harsh overhead lights. Ashton didn't flinch as she rose, his neck straining to maintain eye contact with the giantess. Ayla's presence was a physical weight, a heat that radiated off her skin like a summer meadow. "You bought me," she whispered, her voice a deep resonance that vibrated in Ashton's very marrow. "I freed you," Ashton corrected, his gaze tracing the lines of her face, which were perfectly human in their beauty. She was beautiful in a way that challenged the limits of his imagination, scaled to a magnificent degree. He reached out, his hand looking like a child's against the smooth bone of her ankle. Her skin felt like heated velvet, pulsing with a life force that made his fingertips tingle. Aayla shivered, a tremor that shook the very air around them and made the Xenos retreat. "No one touches the Titaness," she warned, though her body leaned instinctively toward his warmth. "I am not no one," Ashton said, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin above her foot. He looked at the crowd, seeing only their terror of a predator they had failed to tame. He saw his future in the gold of her eyes and the curve of her trembling lips. "Flora, go to the ship and start the warm-up cycle," Ashton ordered, not looking away from his prize. The girl ran off, trusting her father's strength to handle the giant. Ashton stepped closer, his chest nearly touching her shin. "Can you walk, or do I need to find a way to carry you?" Aayla let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You are a small thing. You cannot carry me." Ashton felt the heat from her legs, smelling the rain on hot stone. The walk to the hangar was a spectacle that ground the station's commerce to a sudden halt. Aayla moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her every footfall a thunderclap that echoed in the corridors. Ashton walked beside her, his hand resting firmly on the side of her massive, twitching calf. He could feel the sheer power of the muscle beneath the skin, a sleeping volcano of physical strength. "Why did you spend so much on a broken thing?" Aayla asked, her voice a low hum that stirred the hair on his neck. "Because they were treating you like an animal," Ashton said, his voice tight with an anger that surprised even him. "And because I couldn't look away from your light." She stopped, looking down at him with an intensity that made the floor plates groan. "You have the fire in your eyes, the human soul fire they whisper about in the deep." Ashton nodded, guiding her toward his ship, the Avery. It was a heavy-lift freighter, modified with human ingenuity to handle cargo that others found too daunting. The cargo ramp lowered, the only entrance large enough to accommodate her stature. "It will be tight," Ashton noted, watching her duck her head to enter the hold. Aayla crawled into the space, the sight of her hips swaying, making Ashton's throat dry. The fabric of her dress strained, a strap snapping to reveal a shoulder that could support the sky. He followed her in the ramp, sealing the rest of the galaxy away from them. The hold was dim, lit only by the emergency red strips that painted her skin in fire. Aayla sat against the bulkhead, her knees drawn up to her chin. "I have never been inside a human vessel," she said, her eyes tracking his every movement. Ashton walked between her knees, the heat overwhelming. Aayla leaned her head back against the metal bulkhead, her golden eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp light. "You think you rescued a girl," she said, her voice now a resonant bass that shook the ship's internal frame. "But you rescued a catalyst for something much greater." Ashton frowned, standing in the space between her massive thighs. "A catalyst for what?" Aayla reached down, her fingers wrapping around his waist like living bands of warm iron. She lifted him until they were eye level, his feet dangling high above the floor. "My people are not giants by birth, Ashton. We are giants by energy." She brought him closer to her face, her breath a warm gale that smelled of wild air. "The Xenos used inhibitors on me, keeping me in this form because it was easier to display." Ashton felt the power coming off her now, a pressure in the air that made his skin prickle. "If you remove the collar, I will grow, or I will burn from the inside." The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. "What happens if you burn?" he asked, his heart hammering against her palm. "I destroy this sector and everything in it." Ashton looked at the heavy lead-lined collar around her neck, a piece of suppressive alien technology. "Humans don't like inhibitors," Ashton said, his voice steady despite the height. "We prefer the risk of total efficiency." He pulled a small laser cutter from his belt, the blue beam humming to life. "If I take this off, can you control the surge?" Ayla's eyes searched his, finding a grounded strength that calmed her. "With you, perhaps, as humans have a stabilizing effect on my kind." She pressed him against her chest, and he heard her heart beating like tectonic shifts. Ashton thumbed the cutter. The collar hissed and fell away. The change was immediate and visceral. filling the cargo hold with a golden radiance that blinded his sensors. Aayla didn't get physically larger, but she became more present, her skin glowing like a sun. Ashton felt a surge of energy through his own body, static dancing across his hair and skin. He was still held in her hand, feeling the vibration of her power as it stabilized. Aayla let out a low moan of relief, her gaze now predatory and heavy with hunger. "I can feel you," she said, her voice vibrating through the deck. "Your heat, your intent, and the way your blood sings for me." She set him down on a stack of reinforced crates, but kept her hands on him. She leaned in, her massive face inches from his, her lips parted in a silent invitation. "You are so small, yet you feel like a star in my hands." Ashton reached out, his hands cupping the bridge of her nose and her glowing cheek. "That's just the human spirit, Aayla. We don't know how to be small when it matters." She let out a sound of pure desire, her body shifting over him in the cramped space. The suggestive nature of their positions was undeniable, as she loomed like a mountain of soft, golden light. "I want to know you, Ashton," she breathed, her lips brushing against his entire face. It was like being kissed by a cloud of living fire, a sensation that ignited his blood. Ashton's hands wandered over her skin, feeling the power of muscles that could move moons. "Then know me," he challenged, pulling her closer. The ship rocked violently as an alarm blared through the hold. "Daddy, someone is shooting at us." Flora's voice came over the intercom, shattering the moment. Zalbar had come to reclaim his prize. Ashton jumped to his feet, his mind switching from passion to the cold logic of survival. "Stay here and don't let the energy spike any further." Aayla growled, a sound that made the floor plates rattle in their tracks. "I can fight for us." "Not in here," Ashton shouted as he ran for the cockpit. "You'll rip the hull apart if you lose control." He slid into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the manual overrides he had installed. On the screen, 3 Xeno interceptors were closing in, their plasma banks charging for a killing blow. They were fast, but they were built for a precision that didn't account for human madness. "Flora, get into the subdeck and hold onto the reinforced struts." Ashton gripped the controls, a grin spreading across his face. He didn't try to outrun them, as that was impossible for a freighter of this class. Instead, he flipped the Avery on its axis, using the cargo ramp as a temporary shield. The heavy durasteel absorbed the plasma fire, the ship groaning under the thermal stress. "You want her?" Ashton hissed, his eyes locked on the lead interceptor. "Come and get her through the fire." He triggered the external vents, dumping the waste heat from the overcharged engines directly at them. The alien ship's sensors were blinded by the sudden infrared bloom. Ashton swung the ship around, using its massive bulk like a primitive club in the void. He rammed the second interceptor, the impact sending shudders through the Avery. The alien ship crumpled like foil, its atmosphere venting in a silver spray. But the third one was behind him, its lock-on tone screaming. "Shields at 10%. Flora screamed over the comms. Suddenly, the ship's power levels surged beyond the red line. Aayla was tapping into the grid. The Avery roared as the engines, usually limited by safety protocols, began to glow a brilliant blue. Ashton felt the ship accelerate with a force that pinned him deep into the pilot's seat. He didn't fight the surge, he steered it, feeling Ayla's presence through the ship's very hull. The third interceptor tried to break away, but the human ship was now faster than anything in the sector. Ashton pulled a tight loop that would have snapped the wings off a lesser vessel. He came up behind the Xeno and unleashed the mining lasers, now bolstered by Titan energy. The lasers weren't just cutting tools anymore, they were lances of white light that pierced the void. The interceptor disintegrated in a flash of expanding gas and debris. Space went silent, the only sound being the heavy thumping of Ashton's heart. "We're clear," he whispered, his hands shaking as he leveled the ship. He looked at the power readings, which were fluctuating in a rhythmic, almost breathing pattern. Aayla was the heart of the ship now, her energy sustaining their flight. He left the cockpit and ran back to the cargo hold, his boots clanging on the deck. He found her glowing, her skin a map of light that illuminated every corner of the room. She looked exhausted, her massive chest heaving with the effort of the psychic link. "You did it," he said, walking toward her with open arms. She reached for him, her movements heavy and full of a deep, resonant exhaustion. He climbed into her lap, feeling the heat of her skin through his flight suit. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him against the valley between her breasts. "I felt you," she whispered, her voice tired but full of pride. "I felt your will guiding the fire." Ashton pressed his face against her, feeling the life in her. Ashton looked up at the giant woman, his eyes tracing the golden light that still danced on her. Her dress was a total wreck, barely covering the vast expanses of her skin. The sight was more than his human resolve could handle after the adrenaline of the battle. "Aayla," he groaned, his hands wandering over the warm terrain of her stomach. She looked down at him, her eyes smoldering with a hunger that matched his own. "You are so tiny," she teased, her finger tracing the line of his jaw with agonizing slowness. "But you are the only thing in this galaxy that makes me feel safe." She lay back on the floor of the hold, pulling him with her into the center of her mass. Ashton was sprawled across her stomach, rising and falling with her heavy, satisfied breathing. "I want to see what a human can do when he isn't fighting for his life," she said. Her hand moved, gently pushing him upward toward the swell of her chest. Ashton's heart was a drum, his blood singing with the proximity to her power. He moved with a singular purpose, climbing the mountain of her body until he reached her neck. He kissed the pulse point, feeling the earthquake of her heart beneath his lips. Aayla let out a sharp gasp that sent a gust of warm air over him. Her hands came up to cup him, pressing him harder against her skin as if trying to merge. "More," she commanded, her voice a rumble of pure need. Ashton wasn't afraid of her size. He was emboldened by the challenge of it. He used his teeth, his tongue, and his hands to explore the landscape of her desire. She writhed beneath him, her movements making the ship creak and groan. "Ashton," she cried out, her voice a beautiful, terrifying roar of pleasure. He felt her energy spike again, but this time it was focused entirely on him. He was the ground for her lightning. The intimacy that followed was a blur of heat, scale, and a deep, soul-level connection. Ashton found ways to please her that the Xenos never could have imagined in their coldness. He was a speck of fire on a mountain of gold, his passion bridging the impossible gap of size. Ayla's reactions were tectonic, her pleasure radiating through the hull of the Avery. When she reached her peak, the entire ship hummed with a resonance that felt like a song. Lights flickered, and the gravity plating wavered as her energy reached its zenith. Ashton held on, his hands buried in her thick hair, his body pressed to her heart. He felt her gratitude, her relief, and her burgeoning love for the small man who stood so tall. She settled finally, her breath coming in long, deep sighs that warmed the entire cargo hold. Ashton lay on her chest, his head rising and falling with the steady rhythm of her life. "You are a wonder, Ashton," she whispered, her hand stroking his back with infinite gentleness. "Humans are just very determined," he joked, his voice thick with the emotion of the moment. She laughed, the sound a gentle thunder that made him feel like he was flying. They lay there for a long time as the ship drifted through the velvet void of space. Flora remained asleep in the subdeck, safe and sound under their collective protection. Ashton felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since he first took to the stars. He had found a partner who could match the scale of his ambition and his heart. "Where are we going now?" Aayla asked, her voice a soft hum. "To a human colony," Ashton said, his eyes closing. "They won't mind the size, as we have always liked things that reach for the stars." The arrival at the colony of Asteria was a day that passed into local legend immediately. When the Avery landed and the ramp dropped, Aayla stepped out into the light. The human crowd didn't run in fear or reach for their weapons. They cheered, their voices rising to meet the giantess who had arrived among them. They saw the engineering it took to house her and the beauty of her standing tall. Ashton walked beside her, his hand resting on the golden skin of her heel. Flora sat on Ayla's shoulder, waving to the crowd with a triumphant grin. "Welcome home," Ashton said, looking up at her against the backdrop of the human city. Aayla looked around at the bustling colony, her eyes wide with wonder at the human scale. She saw the massive construction mechs and the skyscrapers that reached for the heavens. "It is a good place," she decided, her voice echoing off the nearby buildings. She looked down at Ashton, her expression one of profound and lasting devotion. "But it is only home because you are the one who walks beside me." Ashton smiled, knowing the Xeno Federation would eventually try to sue for her return. They sent lawyers, and then they sent ships, but they found the humans were not easily moved. The human fleet met them at the edge of the system and told them to turn back. Humanity had a new protector, and she had a new family that would never let her go. Ashton and Aayla lived in a modified hangar palace at the edge of the city. They spent their days exploring the limits of their bond and the potential of their shared fire. Ashton never grew tired of the view or the weight of her hand in his. And Aayla never grew tired of the man who saw a woman where others saw a monster. The single father had taken the giant woman home and saved the galaxy in the process. Ready for dinner, Ashton asked as the sun set. Always, my little star, Aayla replied.